Joining us, Moscow. Now on set with us, Anton Fedyashin. He is a professor of Russian history at American University right here in Washington, D.C. Anton, thanks for joining us. A lot to talk about today. First, let's talk about the fact that he did talk about the ongoing investigation here in the United States and the fact that he said that there's basically hysteria going up over the U.S. Allegations of spy involvement, something Moscow has said simply didn't happen. Your thoughts on that? You got up early and listened to all 4 hours.
Right. So he said nothing new. He's consistent with the message that the Russians have been communicating over the past several months, over a year now, that until there is direct proof of their involvement and meddling in the campaign, this is going to be a non-starter in any kind of political sort of relationship between Moscow and Washington. And so far, the Mueller probe has not really found any smoking gun or any proof of collusion, which is what it set out to find. Communications between the transition team and the Russians, sure, but it had been communicating with representatives and ambassadors from the rest of the world. Nothing new here.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because he did talk about also the fact that there was this discussion going on. And he also talked about what he called the strong developments that Donald Trump has had in his first year, especially looking at the financial markets and how they have moved in such a positive force so far this year. And he also talked about how important it is to have good, strong Russia-U.S. ties. Do you think we're going to see any kind of thaw? Do you see down the road this year better ties between the U.S. and Russia?
Unfortunately not, because the thaw will not depend on Putin or Trump. It will depend on the political atmosphere here in Washington, D.C., especially on Capitol Hill. And unfortunately, I don't see any change in or any tendency for change on Capitol Hill. So the Russians seem to have taken the decision to step back, watch what's going on in Washington, D.C., make no sudden moves, either to risk a bad situation and make it worse, or to try to improve it, which they know is going to backfire.
Let's talk about the DPRK, because he was very blunt about that, saying, look, the U.S. has its responsibility there. So for all of the hawkish talk, do you see better ties in that region? Russia saying basically it is willing to intervene in there to a degree if the U.S. can back off a bit. What would that mean to the whole tension situation?
I didn't read his remarks as promising any sort of intervention, although it's worth keeping in mind that there are 3 countries that border on the DPRK. There's South Korea, there's China, and Russia. So all 3 of those countries have a great stake in what happens on the Korean Peninsula. The Russians do not have much influence over North Korea, nor do the Chinese. There seems to be this consensus in Washington that the Chinese or the Kremlin can just pick up the phone and tell the North Koreans to knock it off. There's a long history of relations between Moscow, Pyongyang, and Beijing, and from the very beginning, from the 1950s on, they have not been terribly simple and direct. So the North Koreans really do have to be spoken to with a modicum of respect.
Let's talk about the relationship with China, because there's a lot that has been said about Putin announcing he's going to run at least once more, and there's some discussions that he could be in power till 2025, almost a quarter of a century, leading Russia. China has a good relationship, and Putin has also said that he believes that China is moving in the right direction with development, improving international relations. What do you take away from the discussions today?
The fact that Putin and President Xi have struck up a very close, very respectful relationship, and it really is a very interesting counter example to the way that things have disintegrated between the West and Russia, because the Chinese, being the more powerful nation, economically, demographically, militarily, some would argue, have gone out of their way to show the Russians respect and to consider their point of view on issues that are of vital national security and economic interests to both sides. And hence the relationship has so far worked.
And also perhaps a little more pragmatic. We've heard that thrown around as well.
Absolutely.
Anton, thanks very much. So much to talk about. Syria, the Olympics. We have to have you back soon.